we'll get into that a little later because I read your questions ahead of time.
Good. Doing your homework.
Currently, in life, I am a husband and dad and a professional bartender.
Awesome.
And I'm in art school to take my creativity to greater heights and have more fun and support my family doing that. So my mind is in a million miles places all the time.
Which I feel like it's always been, actually, since I've known you.
Yeah.
You've always been a hard worker, juggling a number of jobs, diving into a ton of ideas. And you're an idea guy. That's how I would describe you to any of my friends is this is Dennis. He's got brilliant ideas. And I know, unfortunately, some people might look at that as flighty, like, oh, he's onto this, he's onto that. But I actually have always admired that about you, that you're an outside the box thinker, that you come up with different concepts and different solutions that most people wouldn't even not only think of, but allow themselves to dig deeper into. And so for those that might not know, the Vlnrable brand actually started as an iOS app and where people share their stories anonymously. So how exactly did you come up with the app and what inspired you?
The app was birthed out of one of those crazy moments of dreaming. Honestly, I used journaling as a way to get out the kind of the emotional and spiritual gunk that gets built up. I found journaling to be very, very helpful in a relatively dark time. And in that time, I was drinking very heavily, like an insane amount of booze every day, and nobody knew. And so my coworkers knew, but they weren't really my friends. They were just people I worked with. And so
Right.
The journal came in handy because I was also trying to work through aspects of my faith. And so it was like day after day, I was going to Starbucks, don't tell my hipster friends, with my journal and my Bible. And I was digging into the scriptures hungover like every day. And then I would go back to my work and, get schmamboned. It was a real weird time. And what journaling did is it helped me to finally tell somebody I've got a problem in this particular moment in time. And that led me to different parts of freedom. And then the stuff just kept piling on, right? Life doesn't stop for anybody to catch up. And right as I felt like I was to a new place, something else would happen. And that has been progressive throughout my 20s and a little bit less in my 30s so far. That's me trying to cross my little stubby fingers. But the app came from a realization that I, as a probably more emotional, I'm a tall guy, I'm 6'2", and I'm not small, and I have tattoos, and I typically have a beard, and there's attributes about me that would lead to somebody thinking the word masculine or and yet I'm very emotional, and I used this tool, which is very emotional in journaling, to work through a lot of that gunk in myself. And I've experienced a lot of freedom. That doesn't mean that I've overcome these spiritual or emotional things all the time. I actually just wrote a poem on a plane a few days ago and couldn't even read it without bawling my eyes out, which was weird. I had tried to read it to my wife, and I couldn't. Jenna, you know her. Somebody else might not.
That's right. I do know her, but for those listening, that is his wife, Jenna.
Sure. I couldn't even read the poem. And so that's where the app was really birthed out of, was that reality that even myself, who has figured out a way to work through my emotions, still gets caught up. There's still build up there. And I think the world needs a safe, anonymous place to share parts of that. And so that's where the app came from.
I completely agree. The anonymity, that's a really hard word. Let's try to say that 5 times
Bladibladibly.
fast.
The
Being
bladibladibly.
anonymous. Being anonymous. I knew that this episode was going to be hilarious. And I think I'll just let the audience know now. You might as well just laugh because this is pretty much our friendship. But being anonymous, I think, was something that we all said from the get-go was important. That Facebook and Twitter, all of these things, you have your little avatar, your name, all of your info and your content. There's really not, even though people do rant and say exactly what they think, it's not really a safe space to just, like you said, work that gunk out and say it and get it out without having shaming or, name calling or whatever the case may be, or even in your own, even if everybody's fine and receptive, maybe you being embarrassed of it. And so it's really, I think that being anonymous was a great step. And it's something that, I wish I had years and years ago, being able to just say those things anonymously. So there's something really powerful in some of the posts on the Vlnrable app. And for those of you that haven't even checked it out, I should take a minute and say, if you have an iOS device, please go to the App Store and download Vlnrable. And yes, we decided to be catchy and get rid of some of the vowels, but it's Vlnrable. And there's everything, I actually just went over it the other day because I haven't used it in probably like a week. And I went and read some of it, and there's some powerful posts that it's everything from abandonment issues because a father who's left, someone that posted about announcing they're coming out to their family, another person who feels stuck and mediocre. And then there was some silly posts that, like drinking a delicious beer and then discovering there was a worm in it. I read that one and I laughed. Or another one that was being on Tinder for 3 days and not getting a match. And my first reaction was I laughed. I cracked up that's all they posted. And then I thought, while that might make us laugh, that there's really nothing scarier than putting yourself out there on a dating site or a hookup site. Talk about vulnerable. To say, hey, I'm putting myself out there and I haven't gotten a match. And so what is one of your favorite stories? And if you would, recap that or read that for our listeners today.
Yeah, I will do you the favor and not read it. But the story in there, it's posted as anonymous, so I'm sharing my anonymity. But the story is called Visionary Complex. And is not long. It's just this right here. You probably can't see it because of sunlight. It's just white on the screen.
Oh yeah, I saw a little bit of it.
All right. So the story behind it is that for years, since I was a teenager, I've had people tell me, "Man, you've got potential." I almost hate the word potential. I almost can't stand the word. But I've heard for so long, you have potential. When you finally figure out that one thing you're going to do, you're going to just kill it. That one thing, find that one thing. What's that one thing? And, you and I have had conversations about my lack of interest to have just one thing. I don't want to have one thing. The idea of being a one-trick pony sounds terrible. I want to be able to run the circus. You know what I mean? Definitely. And so this story that I wrote was about my desire to be recognized for anything, and feeling like my desire for recognition outweighed the amount of work I was doing in that thing that I was trying to be recognized for, whatever that thing may be. So whether that was poetry or creativity or, being pastoral or my faith or as a blogger or whatever, even having the app, like I want notoriety for creating this thing that is selfish, and at times it's wicked of me to want that sort of notoriety. The truth is that this is, and you being my partner in this, is one of the greatest things, because this is the work that goes in, right? So in some way, the story that I chose, I'm getting the opportunity to foreshadow, hopefully, to cast a different a different thing on this story and my future. But it's something that's plagued me, is the idea of what was the P word?
Oh,
Potential.
the one you said you hated before, potential.
Yeah.
Well, because I think that the word potential it's like a double-edged sword. It's saying you're not quite good enough. You know what I mean? I mean, really, it's a backhanded compliment. You have such potential, and really, it feels more like they're saying you're not quite there, kiddo. You know, keep going, and maybe one day you'll get it. And I think with you, it's maybe some people haven't discovered that is your potential, that being somebody who has multiple visions and multiple dreams is your potential. That's what you should be doing. And I've been reading a few different books kind of on that same subject. The Art of Work by Jeff Goins, and that's a brilliant one, talking about you actually might do multiple things in life, but they might weave a similar story. So for you, almost everything you have your hand in really ties together in some way. It's either it's sharing your heart or telling your story or being creative. And I feel the same with me. Almost everything I do, you're not going to find me all of a sudden becoming a bioengineer. That would be so out of character for me.
It would be so sad. The world would miss out on so much beauty.
Right. It just wouldn't make sense for me. And I think that's just it. You know, we're allowed to, explore multiple things. And I think that's what's so great about you diving into this. It's another way for you to facilitate other people sharing their stories, but yours as well. And that's so important too. So why do you think it's important for people to share their stories? What helps them and how do they benefit?
Yeah, this is probably one of my biggest soapbox things, this concept. And what I wrote down in my notes is kind of the core chunk of this, the idea that, whether it's alcoholism or infidelity or obesity or whatever, drug abuse, depression, there's a lot of these things. They're not just because they're not things that just are. Nobody just cheated on their husband or wife because it was like the fun, happy, normal, natural thing to do. And I would go as far as to say very few people, in my opinion, you're welcome to disagree, that are obese or severely depressed, that it's just totally natural without anything pre that outcome, right? So what I believe deeply is that we are sort of overran by our guilt and our shame and our fear and our regret and our insecurities, and we want to have this no regrets type attitude, right? But the truth is that we all have them. And it's the saddest when people say, I don't have any regrets, because that's just bullshit. You do. Everybody does. They may not be monumental. You may not have cheated on a husband or wife or girlfriend or boyfriend, but that doesn't mean you don't regret something.
Sure, absolutely.
And if we're not getting that stuff out, if the way that we're treated by our parents growing up, or the abuse that we received, or for those who have been sexually assaulted, or people that have been called fat their whole life even when they were skinny, and then they have to work through that. If we're not working through it and being vulnerable and telling the truth behind the truth, then it in some way manifests itself into obesity, depression, anxiety, infidelity. The list sort of goes on and on. Drug abuse, love of money, love of sex, whatever it is. Even another quick sidebar, like Instagram, for instance. Everybody wants to be an Instagram model.
Right.
I promise.
Including myself.
Yeah, I mean, I do.
Have you seen me?
Have you seen her? I know that these women and men too didn't grow up as little boys and girls and think man, I want to put my tits and ass on a free photo app and get 100,000 likes. Like that was nobody's dream. It's the outcome of our fears and our insecurities and our shame and our guilt.
Sure. I agree. I think that it's complex. It's society, what society says you should and shouldn't look like. It's your past, maybe what someone has told you or how you were raised or, you know, anything. And in regards to obesity or depression, you know, and then other times you have health conditions involved. And, but that aside, health conditions aside, there is a lot of deep rooted unresolved stuff, or as you keep calling it, gunk, which is so true. It's like that that you just need to work itself out. And I know obviously that's what we have great therapists for. That's what we have people that are skilled in doing that. But I think it also starts with a really basic human level, which is connecting with each other and being real. And I think some people mistake the thought of vulnerability for just airing all your dirty laundry, when I really think it's more than that. It's being able to say, well, this is why, this is the story behind this.
Mm-hmm.
And it's good for you and it's good for them. And, you know, I think oftentimes we seek to understand and to define and connect with others really by asking the question, I hear this all the time, what do you do? And we've all felt that at a dinner party, at a work function. What is it that you, well, at work, they probably know what you do, but anything else, it's like, what do you do? And I've always hated that question, mainly because I've never felt like I've been defined what I do, just like you feel the same way. It's like, well, you're a bartender, you're a creator, you're social media expert, you do graphic design, you do this, you do that, you're a husband, a father. Where does it end?
Mm-hmm.
And so how do you summarize that in, well, this is what I do? And I was thinking about this recently, that I think really what they're getting at is, who are you?
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I can understand you and define you and connect with you. And what's your story? And, you know, to go deeper with it, I think what they're getting at is connecting and belonging. So, you know, with that, why were you drawn to the subject of vulnerability? Obviously, you talked about journaling and being able to get that gunk out, but why were you drawn to that more than, say, journaling or some other, you know, since you are creative, another creative aspect like writing poetry or songwriting, or you name it? Why vulnerability?
And I guess the honest answer is they all tie together for me.
Okay.
Vulnerability and journaling is just another sword in the sheath, or another arrow in, you know, the quiver, pew, of creative outlets for me. It started as being a songwriter, being, you know, this super rad lead singer of a rap rock band that wore bandanas and dickies. You know what I mean? Like,
Blood.
when who doesn't love that story? But it started there. It started with my songs being about the gunk. Most of the songs I wrote were about me failing miserably in one way or another. And I didn't always talk about what I did in the failure. What I wrote about a lot was what was happening in here with that failure.
Right.
And that transitioned into me having the chance to tell my story locally. And then I started writing poetry because I was no longer writing songs. And that's about the time that I was in that deep alcohol moment. I was no longer writing songs. I was writing poetry because I didn't have any music to put the words to. And,
right.
You know, I've always bought blank journals. I hate lines. Lines are so defining. They tell me where I should be, and I hate that. And so I would buy these blank journals, and it would be scribbles and poems and stories and Bible verses, and an attempt to understand things that I didn't understand before about myself or eternity or the world around me. And, you know, it all is one and the same. It's of the same accord for me. And I think that's why it has become so natural. is because I don't look at vulnerability or journaling or telling your story or writing your story as separate things. I don't look at the fact that I have done this and that and that and this and this and that as different things. They all are a common thing.
Yeah,
I sit in
I
different
agree.
seats, and I may, show up at different times of the day and whatever. But, even bartending, I get to create cocktails that I try to not look at recipes because it's fun for me. I like to make things. And so vulnerability is it's another weapon for me. It's another thing to utilize, I think.
Right, something to utilize. Sure. And it always cracks me up because the definition of vulnerable is always actually a negative thing. Like if you look it up, I think it says something like being susceptible to like a physical or emotional attack. And even in the IT world, vulnerable means something negative as well. Like your website is vulnerable for a malware attack or anything like that. It goes, into this vulnerable, it's bad, it's weak. And so straight out the gate, the word vulnerable seems weak or negative. And I find it interesting that now all of a sudden it's getting this positive twist because I think people are starting to understand it and crave for it. And Brene Brown, the author who obviously speaks and talks about vulnerability a lot. Yes, we love her. Who doesn't? She defines vulnerability as uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. And then she adds to be human is to be in vulnerability. And I love that because pretty much that's what you're saying is all of these things that you do, they're all tied together for you. And that's because you're a human. And if you are going to be a healthy human, you need to be vulnerable.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so I know we kind of lightly touched on this, but what does being vulnerable mean to you?
It's the truth behind the truth. I mean,
Okay.
very, very simply put, it's the intention and the detail behind the thing.
Okay. So to dig in deeper, and I'll kind of try to pry it out of you a little more. When you say the truth behind the truth, do you mean more? Okay. So if I'm telling my story, it's what really is behind the story, or the why I'm telling my story. Okay.
Yeah, I think being honest is one thing. You guys are going to hear my kids.
Oh, that's fine. They might hear my coworkers as well. No big deal.
It's the truth behind the truth. Just being honest is one thing. I could, in many ways, and I did it for years, letting people believe that they were in my inner circle. My mentors used to call me out on it. They would tell me that I have an inviting stiff arm. Because what I would do is I would be honest with people and I would tell them things that I'd done. I would tell them details about my life. I would tell them things I struggled with, but I never told them why. I never gave them the truth behind the truth. And so vulnerability for me, as I've grown to know more and I've searched my heart deeper and I've observed humanity more, is that very simply, it's the truth behind the truth. I think there's more to be said. I think being vulnerable is one of the most courageous things a human can do. I've known a lot of men that are big and muscular and tattooed and bearded, and they're weak. They, talk shit and chase ass and call it masculinity and figuring life out and being tough. And at the end of the day, who knows them? Maybe nobody. And that's all we want, right? Like, every human on the planet only wants to be known.
Absolutely.
And we can only be known if we're telling the truth behind the truth.
I mean, I agree, because it's one thing to say, and it does take courage, but it's one thing to say I'm an alcoholic, but it's another thing to say I'm an alcoholic because this happened to me, or because I'm struggling with these feelings or suppressing these emotions or whatever the case may be. And really, I think that's that's what people like to hear. Is I could get up in front of people and tell them a whole bunch of facts about me, and they could be vulnerable truths, but they wouldn't really be vulnerable in essence. Sure,
Right.
I could stand up in front of a crowd and go, "Hi, I'm Angie. I'm a Christian. I'm gay. I love art. I'm this. I'm that. I struggle with body image. Whatever." But to then go into deeper reasonings behind all of these things, I agree with you. That is really where things get honest and they get deep, and you have that connection.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that at the heart of vulnerability is connection. I think that's what it's about. That being vulnerable doesn't mean that you're weak. It means that you're being courageous and you're opening yourself up for that connection and that freedom to be your authentic self.
Yeah.
And I
Sorry.
carry on. No, you go. You go.
No. I was just going to give a little vulnerability behind. I didn't realize that I was going to talk about it so much, but that moment at 23, 24 years old when I was drinking my face off, I have zero issue about talking about that issue.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any issue really talking about any issue. But what I haven't done is said why I drank so much. So the vulnerable truth behind the truth that I was at one time immersed into alcohol consumption is rejection.
Mm-hmm.
I was the lead singer of a band for 4 years that wasn't known by many people, but the people that we were known by happened to love us. And there comes a sense of pride with that. I've had people ask me for my autograph. That is very weird that people somewhere, maybe in a box in their attic, have my name written on something. That's weird, but it gave me a sense of fulfillment. And when that was gone, when that was taken away, and there was no more desire for Dennis to be in the spotlight, what I felt was rejection. And where I found a new acceptance was with coworkers. And it was going out after work, there was a special at this sports bar that we would go to, Jaeger and a Miller Lite for $5. My good Lord Jesus, have I drank more Jaeger and Miller Lite than anybody in their life should think about.
That's such a bro drink to drink.
I know. That's what I was going for. And then it turned into, well, if I can find acceptance in this thing, then I'll just do this thing all the time. So I started to drink before work, and then I was drinking while I was working. I'd make a shot and then pour myself an extra. And I'd get to the end of the night and I'd be, 3 sheets to the wind, and would still drive to the bar and still pound Miller Lite and Jägermeister, and then would still drive home.
Right.
And would still wake up and go read my Bible hungover as hell, because I was trying to find a cure for the rejection in all of those things. So, there's the vulnerable truth behind the truth,
right.
which is sort of my mantra, being, the truth behind the truth.
I think that's what people really want to hear. I do. I know we could sit and do, an hour-long podcast on vulnerability, but, Brene Brown has got that covered. I think what people want to hear is who we are. Mm-hmm. And we all have a following. We all have people that know us and love us, or are interested or intrigued, and they want to know more. And I feel like when they hear those truths and they hear that background, maybe they can't relate to drinking a lot. Maybe they can't relate to being a Christian, but they might be able to relate to rejection. Mm-hmm. And that is what I'm discovering, is if you kind of, reduce it all down at its core, there's usually this one thing, and it's fear. Really, it's fear. Fear of rejection, fear of being alone, fear of being unloved, you name it. And everyone can relate to that. Mm-hmm. The stories might be different, but they all connect. And so as you're talking about this, since vulnerability really is at its core acceptance and belonging, when have you felt most alone?
When I'm not accepted, typically by people that I care about or that openly care about me. There have been many situations over the last 15 years of being an adult that I've wanted to do something, or had a passion for something, or wanted to go in a direction, and somebody close to me couldn't wrap their head around it. I remember, I'll tell one story from years and years ago. I have a friend named Bear, and he's a dynamic human, one of the most dynamic personalities you could ever meet. And I wanted him to speak on stage with me. I wanted to do a dual presentation because his energy and charisma is so intense, and I have an emotional element, and he's a lot of fun. Like all the time is a lot of fun. And so I had this idea to bring those two together and collide them on stage in this kind of storytelling explosion of awesome. And he rejected me. It was like, just that seems kind of stupid to me. And like I had never felt, that's a lie. I had in other ways. I felt very alone and very rejected. And he didn't mean anything by it. He just was literally saying, no, I've got a path and I'm on that path. And you want to go dance around in front of high school kids and do backflips, be my guest. But I'm not going to join you in your circus. But the way that it affected me was
right.
wild.
And were you able to communicate that to him?
I literally have never said any of those words out loud until just now.
Well, Bear, if you're listening, which I'm sure you are.
You broke my heart, you bastard.
Oh, gosh. I hope the show turns into lots of these moments where it's like, if you're listening, I'm going to tell you this.
10 years ago. Surprise.
Well, because really, obviously, Bear meant no harm by it. Obviously, he's saying that's not my thing. And that's okay, right? He's like, no, that's not my thing. I'm not interested in that. So his response wasn't wrong in any way. It's then turning to you saying, well, why did that hurt so much? Why do I feel rejected? Did I take it personally and think he didn't like my idea? Is it because I don't know. I really was stoked about it and wanted my partner in crime, my buddy, to join me on this thing. And that's hard. And that actually is a really good point. I didn't have this in the notes to discuss, but it's so fitting that a lot of times we think vulnerability is purely about emotions and giant things. Like, let's talk about how this happened. Let's talk about how I
divorce and
exactly
abortion and
yes, I was molested. I was this, I was that. All those are great too, because trust me, everybody has some sort of deep story. Mm-hmm. But then there's the other point of vulnerability, which is your work. It's your ideas and putting yourself out there. And there's nothing more intimidating than presenting a new idea or concept. And I know a lot of my listeners can relate because they're also in the creative field, that when you throw a creative idea out there or a new concept, to get shot down is it feels like rejection. It feels like asking someone out on a date and they just said no and your heart's broken.
Yeah.
And really, when you examine it, in the end, the responsibility then falls back on us, because we then have to process and know, well, I don't need their approval. And just because they said no doesn't mean I'm rejected. Mm-hmm. Maybe they're not the right fit. But it is very vulnerable to say, hey, if you have a boss, to take a new idea to your boss. And he goes, no, that idea sucks.
Hard pass. See ya.
Exactly. So I guess one of the next questions is, if you had a chance for a do-over in life, what would you do differently?
I would have gone to art school at 22 instead of 33.
Okay, fair enough.
It's like my only do-over. Not to say that I don't have regrets or, things that I could have improved, but I missed out on 11 years of being awesome.
You've already been awesome, just in different ways. But there's obviously we all kind of take our own little windy path, and I feel like we're similar in that way. That yes, I started doing my art career a long time ago, but I also have been on that, like, oh, maybe I'll try this, or maybe I'll go to school for that, or maybe I'll dabble in public speaking, and it's a little bit of the same way where it's that ENFP, ADD, thing going on.
Squirrel.
Yes.
Rabbit.
Exactly. For those of you that don't know what ENFP is, go take your Myers-Briggs personality. It's enlightening.
And then cry.
It's true. No, that's good. I think that's really great because regrets and do-overs, I think, are a little bit different. You can regret something, but maybe not want to fully change it. Maybe you want to change the outcome or your response. But a do-over is completely like, hey, if I had the chance right now to revisit high school or to revisit my early 20s and go to art college, I would. I would drop everything and do it. So I get that. You would. You'd do it.
Before I have gray hairs all in my mustachio.
You know, you're going to be the coolest art student, or already are the coolest art student. They're probably like, who is this old guy in my class?
Hey, Grandpa, can you come help me with MS-DOS?
Oh, man, they don't even know what MS-DOS is right now.
Yeah, no, that was the joke.
Oh, kids. I love it. Well, so I guess in contrast to that, what is your greatest dream or desire for your life? I know that's a huge question, but what's your greatest dream or desire?
It honestly, at this point in life, doesn't have a whole lot to do with me. I think about this a lot. I spent all of my 20s wanting to do something great for me, wanting to build my brand and, create organizations that change the world and feed the homeless and impact communities. And I did some of those things on small levels, and then being able to develop the app on which is propelled itself and continuing to propel this idea of vulnerability and being courageous into bigger places. But my biggest dream in all of my life is that I would do three things. Pew, pew, pew. That I would that I would be an assistant to Jenna's, my wife, for those of you who don't know her personally, to Jenna's peace. I can't do anything to control that, right? But I can at least be a conduit of peace to her.
And so you mean peace as in calm, tranquility, wholeness, that kind of peace, not a puzzle piece.
Correct. Not
Okay.
I'm her puzzle piece by matrimony. The idea is that I would be a conduit to her own self wellness.
Okay.
That I would not be continually just banging up against her negatively, but that I would usher her into and support her through life.
Okay.
And I mostly suck at doing that, but it's one of my goals. Number two is that my daughter would not have daddy issues. There's some background there. I inherited her, so I'm dad number two. Biological dad is not in the picture, and I have parental rights, and so it is my parental right to make sure that she does not have daddy issues, which means it's like 2 times the boulder to turn.
Right.
And that is like, dear Lord, baby Jesus.
For those of you listening, he was doing little prayer hand signals.
Prayer hands and said, "Dear Lord, baby Jesus."
Yes, desperately.
That would not affect how she lets people interact with her.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third thing is that my boy, I have a 2.5-year-old boy, that he would be comfortable doing anything. Right. So whether that means he wants to play, I hate baseball, despite the fact that I'm wearing a baseball hat. I don't really like the game. But whether he wanted to play baseball or he wanted to play the cello, or he wants to sing, or he wants to be in theater, or he wants to draw, or he wants to be a carpenter, that he would feel comfortable being and doing the most pure thing in his heart. That's loving who he wants to love, whether that same gender, biracial. That it's very important to me that my son would feel enough encouragement and love from his home that he knows he can do whatever is the truest to his heart. Which is why my biggest do-over would be to do school at 22 instead of 33, because I didn't feel that. And I grew up with parental issues, and I did not grow up in a home where any ushering was done for peace.
Wow.
And so my ultimate goal is to break the cycle and undo what was done in the generation before me in my immediate bloodline.
I think that's so interesting, because I feel, one, the amazing thing, and I think it's probably true for us all, is when you listed dreams and desires for your life, not just immediate goals. That's different. You know, if I said, hey, what are you excited to accomplish this year? You'd probably mention some tasks or goals. But when you're talking about your life, you know, in general, you're mentioning not things, but people, and they happen to be your family. And I feel for most people, that's really what matters is people, which is why vulnerability matters, because it's connecting with people. And I also find it amazing and incredible that you're trying to live a legacy that is undoing what has been handed to you. Which is why I've been hearing this a lot lately. The same common thread is, you know, people create things out of need or necessity because it happened to them. And I'll probably butcher this quote, but I think it was Aristotle or somebody like that said, I think it is Aristotle, that says necessity is the birth of invention. Don't quote me completely on it, but it's the gist. That basically when you see a need, then who better to come up with that thing than you? And if you see a need because it's something you dealt with, then who's more equipped than you? Which is why, to go full circle, why being vulnerable is so important, because who better than to connect with people about those very things than you, the person that has faced that and can admit that. So, and I think you're doing a great job. You know, I'm not married to you and those aren't my kids, but I think as a friend, you're doing amazing. And the fact that you have that desire is already on the great path. You know, it's sad to me. You're so welcome. You're so welcome. So now that you've launched the app and we're building an online community and trying to build a podcast, I guess what else would you like to see come out of Vlnrable?
Insert awkward thinking noises. You know, the legacy for Vlnrable is that in my heart is that humanity in some way, and this is lofty, right? Like this is the idea that I could impact all of humanity. That humanity would believe that they're not alone in two different sides. One is that they're not alone in what's been done or what they've done, and that they're not alone in how they feel and how they're responding. So it really is twofold, that we as a people, as a humanity, as a common thread, as you know, yours and mine. Well, he's not really my friend. I was going to say yours and my friend Rob Bell. He's not my friend. He's a badass, not my friend.
For those of you that don't know, Rob
friend.
Bell is a famous author and definitely doesn't know Dennis. I loved that.
Does not
that
know
was
me.
Great. That was great. But yes, our dear friend Rob Bell.
Yeah, my personal man crush Rob Bell. That he would say that there's a common energy and thread that has run through all of humanity. And it's an energy, it's a thread, it's a connection. It's the same idea that grass is in some way all connected, right? Like trees, if we could be creative and paint some sort of illustration, it's the idea that all the roots meet in the middle. That we would believe in our story and in each other enough to know that what has happened to me has happened to other people, and that makes it safe to talk about. It makes it okay to share those parts of my story. And on the other end, my reaction to certain things I'm not alone in either. And so it makes it a safe place for me to tell those secrets, to get those things off my chest. I'm not the only person who drank their face off because they felt rejection.
Right.
I am not the only person to do that. I'm also not the only high school boy to pay for an abortion.
Right.
I'm not, I'm not the only guy to watch pornography. Fuck, it's a multi-billion-dollar business. And there's these things that we're not talking about, right? We're afraid to be alone. We're afraid of the rejection. All of the things that we've discussed in this conversation are true to this point, that we don't want to be alone. We're afraid of multiple things. We crave connectivity and being known, and unity and togetherness. And when there's the fear that something we've done or that has been done to us can throw a wedge in to that desire of being connected and being unified and being accepted, then we go, nope, not it.
Yep.
Somebody else can say it, but it's not going to be me. When in the reality is, if there was 100 people in a room who didn't know that they shared the same thread, maybe it's divorce, that they were divorced or their parents were divorced, that if 100 people were in the room and somebody said, my parents got divorced when I was 10, and all 100 of those people would tell a part of their story, guaranteed, it's incredible. I was working 2 nights ago at the bar. Quick story, and then I'll be done. And I served 2 girls that were from Austin, Texas. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I used to live there. And one of the girls was like, oh, how long? And where'd you live? And I said, oh, I lived in Round Rock. And they were like, well, that's where we live. And I was like, that's a freaking small world. I only lived there for 6 months, though. And they said, why? And I said, okay, I'm going to tell you the answer to this question, but you're not allowed to feel sorry for me. And she just looked at me puzzled. And I said, I'll tell you the answer as to why I left Austin, but you can't feel sorry for me. I don't want uhs, and I don't want, oh, I'm so sorry. Just be engaged in the story. And she was like, yeah, fine. And I said, I moved to Austin because why not? It's Austin. The truth behind the truth is that I moved to Austin because I was heartbroken and I wanted a new start. While I was in Austin, my mom got diagnosed with lung cancer. And so I moved back home. And she was like, that's bananas.
Yeah, how can you drop info like that and have her not go, oh, I'm so sorry?
Because it was her story. She had moved to the Bay.
Wow.
And moved back to Austin when her mom was diagnosed with cancer.
Wow.
And
that's mind-blowing.
And in that moment, they were visiting. They were passing through, moving one of the sisters from Texas to some other state. And in that moment, 2 humans that have zero knowledge of one another share very big details of the same story. And she would have never known had I not been willing to say, I moved back home because my mom was diagnosed with cancer and later died. Mm-hmm. She would have never known that another human felt her same pain, knew the same details of her story, moving states, moving back home, taking care of a loved one, that loved one then dying, and then being left with picking up the pieces. Mm-hmm. That girl, I don't know, she may be older than me. I don't know how old she is. That woman now knows for the rest of her life that she is not alone in her experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which is powerful. It's powerful because there's something about feeling alone that's so isolating, and you feel that you have no one to turn to, or no one understands, or there's no one to help. And sometimes you just need someone to be there. You don't even need advice. Sometimes you don't even need help. You just need the presence of another human being, and to know that they have empathy. They can say, yes, I understand. I have so been there. And not sympathy, but empathy. And that's powerful.
Sometimes
that's
you just
amazing.
need somebody to lean on.
It's true. And it's true. And I appreciate you sharing that story, because not only is that something, deeply personal to share, but it really profoundly illustrates why we're doing what we're doing. Mm-hmm. That's the heart of it. Sure, we can do this in our daily lives. And I feel that doing this from day to day is the most effective way to actually connect with people. But if we can branch out and have a bigger audience and platform, like podcasting or public speaking, blogging, you name it, and keep encouraging that vulnerability, the better, because there's certain people we might not be able to reach simply because we don't live in the same place. But if they hear our stories and know, hey, I'm not alone, that person's been through the same thing, that does something to somebody. And I remember for myself, when I was coming to terms with my sexuality and my faith, it was such a personal earthquake. It was like everything in my life shook and shattered, and I was left going, how the hell do I move forward from this? I know that this is the fundamentals of my faith, but this is who I am, and how do they meet? And so for me, one of the first things I did is I went online and I started Googling and researching, and I would find a couple different online forums and groups and communities, and I started connecting with them because simply for the reason I wanted to connect. I wanted to know I'm not alone. And as silly as it sounds now, being 35 and feeling comfortable in my own skin, if you would have talked to me about 10 years ago or 15 years ago, being 25, I would not have been comfortable in my own skin, and I wouldn't have even had the courage to admit it or even branch out. And so just having that person to connect with and hear their stories for me was absolutely a game changer, because like I said, I felt at 20 or 25 like I was believe it or not, I felt like I was the only human on the planet that happened to love Jesus and women at the same time. I was like, I have to be the only woman in the world that feels this way, which is hilarious. It's hilarious because the more I tell my story, the more I go, oh my goodness, there is so many freaking people that have the exact same story as me that it's almost old news now. Like, yeah, okay, same story, But that's what it does. Your story, sharing that at the bar, really, really ignites people and connects them. So as we wrap up, do you have any parting thoughts to leave with our audience, or maybe even simple steps to take towards vulnerability for them?
Start somewhere. That's the only advice I can give is start somewhere. It may start with being honest. It may not start with the truth behind the truth. You may have to just get the first truth out. Like the first truth may be, I've struggled with alcoholism. That may be the thing. If you need to, buy a journal, buy a lined one, a gridded one, a big one, a small one. It doesn't matter. Use pen, use pencil, use marker. There's no rule to this. It's comfort. It's whatever makes you feel the most comfortable, and then be honest. Be vulnerable. Tell the truth behind the truth. When you get there, the biggest thing I could say is download the app. It'll totally save your life. But maybe that was too big of a plug. But seriously, download the app. The
app is free. So for people listening, this isn't a pitch on money. And matter of fact, Vlnrable as of right now is we don't see a dime. We don't even have it registered as a nonprofit because it literally makes nothing. It's nothing.
We're a goose egg. It's not nothing though. It's so valuable. And you'll find stories on there that will change you.
Yeah.
Small stories. They're short. They're not laborious to read. It's just my kids are standing looking in the mirror saying hi to themselves. So as we wrap up, start somewhere. I mean, that's the biggest thing is find someone you trust, find a journal, find a parent, find a counselor, find a coworker, find somebody.
Great.
And then, kick ass.
I love it. Dee, thank you so much for being on the show today, and I hope we hear many, many more episodes from you, maybe some interviews that you'll lead. For our listeners, we hope that you enjoy this journey along with us. I'll leave you with this quote from a poet, Oriah, and it says, "It doesn't interest me what you do for a living. I want to know what you ache for and what you dare to dream of meeting your heart's longing." So we want you to find that Find your longing, friends. Thanks for tuning in. And until next time, have a great one.
Adios.
Bye.